Thank you, Michel. Dear friends and colleagues, many people I have been working with over my years at IRSN and then as chair of Melody. As you said, I speak here on behalf of not only Melody, but the 5 European platforms. So I will give you a few more informations about the platforms and then also reflect on why it is a good idea to spend 3 days together, because we all have busy agendas, but you're all here, and thanks everybody to have actually come to this great meeting in Paris. The platforms, in fact, have been born in recent years, in the last decade, so we are far from the 90 years of the ICRP, but they were born of a thought which was shared in many research communities in Europe and in governments and in the European Commission. And the idea was that some of the research issues that are still behind radiation protection improvement indeed are the most complex. The simple issues, relatively simple, have been resolved. What is remaining is actually very complex, either because it addresses fundamental research needs in biology, for example, or because the improvement of the toolbox to help operational radiation protection is hitting some really difficult issues like post-accident management after a large accident. The tools which are there, operational tools to take early decisions, good decisions, are still in infancy. So there's a lot to do, and no country, no single institution can handle that alone. And the idea was to use the fact that we have in Europe a Euratom treaty which brings together the nations, now extended to Ukraine, to actually work together to resolve these issues through the framework research programs. And the idea came in the last decade that not only was this money available for research on a European basis, complementing the national initiatives, but there could be further usefulness of that research funds if there were together the definition of research agendas, strategic research agendas, research roadmaps, if there were joint projects operated by the European research institutions, not only for 5 years, but with a perspective of actually addressing the problems in a kind of organized way over a longer period. So in European jargon, we call that the European integration of research. And this is a policy which is supported very strongly by the European Commission, which I also would like to thank here, but also the governments of Europe. And the research community is responding to this by organizing itself not only in kind of disciplinary associations, because there were before associations of the disciplines just to defend the discipline. But the platforms are not that. The platforms are actually aiming at radiation protection issues, of course using the know-how of their members, which comes in different categories, but the target is improving radiation protection. It's not just to defend radioecology or dosimetry or whatever, radiobiology. It is to achieve progress in the knowledge in order to contribute to the future reinforcement of the research knowledge. So why are we here? I forgot to say, these platforms are open associations, so they have different statutes based in different countries of Europe, it doesn't matter, but all of them follow the principle that they are open associations. You can become a member, of course, if you meet the requirements, but this is quite wide, and so these are open associations. It's not limited to a lobby group. Why do we spend some time together here in Paris? Well, this idea, I mean, Jean-Christophe has already explained how the history of this idea to have actually a joint event between ICRP and the platforms. I would like to just spend a few more minutes to explain the interest of this unique, so far, initiative. The radiation protection platforms are about research, and for us the ICRP community is a very important stakeholder, because research is not an end of itself. Research is to be used in regulatory control by the industry, by the medical professions. So you need kind of the transfer of knowledge. And ICRP has established itself since many decades as the center for that. But there needs to be a dialogue. And these 3 days offer many opportunities of dialogues in different little boxes, and the agenda is very complex, the different sessions, but I hope that all of you will find at least several sessions in all this big program where you will have discussions which concern you personally in your own missions. And we shall see afterwards if that was well succeeded or not. So it is an important interface. But I would also like to reflect that if you think of other, radiation risks are not the only risks which society faces in modern life. We have many sources of risks, and we have many regulatory systems addressing the different issues. But radiation protection is probably the oldest within international basis. It is very sophisticated with respect to, if you compare to other regulations on chemicals or pressure vessels or whatever you want to say, it is a lot more sophisticated. It is harmonized worldwide, and there is a common language and common values which have been established over the years. And this is actually unique in the world in that area. So we have a common language, so that makes it easier, of course, to discuss matters, because if you don't even have a common language, which is a lot of situation, if you compare with climate change or other things, it's okay, it's coming, but it's not quite yet there. This system is based on 3 major pillars. The first one is it is a science-based explicitly, and not all systems are more or less science-based, but the radiation protection system is unique in the sense that it explicitly refers to science, and so do the regulations. They explicitly refer to scientific expertise. It is also value-based, and these values, it's also unique, are actually in the laws. Those limitations, the different principles of radiation protection are in the law, and these represent the values. And the licensing systems are harmonized. Okay, maybe not everybody uses the same recommendation at the same time, but this will come. And in Europe in particular, we have one common regulation, which is the BSS directive, which we all have to implement in a similar way. Does that mean that this system is perfect? Of course not, and there is always things to do, as Claire has reminded us, that there are always things to review and also to try and solve problems which we know still are in front of us. Why? There could be 3 directions for this kind of looking for improvements. We have to reduce the scientific uncertainties which still exist in a number of areas. We have to continue to improve the toolbox for the operational radiation protection. And I think even the values, they still need some improvement. And in our European platforms, we are also involving, I didn't mention that, but the human sciences and social sciences are an important parameter because this is also a science aspect of things. How the human society deals with certain risks can be studied scientifically, and this has an important input. So about the scientific uncertainties, of course, the fact that they remain in some areas, that has 2 consequences. One is that because we have the precautionary principles, but that increased the costs. So we have a good radiation protection system, but we have to be aware that in certain areas, the way we implement it raises operational costs in industry, which maybe is not really justified, apart from the good reason for the precautionary principle. But if we knew better, maybe we could be wiser and reduce some costs. The other side of the coin is that uncertainties, and there is maybe some manipulation there, but that's a fact of life, uncertainties generate societal fears, concerns, and this is also detrimental to the optimal functioning of society. So to reduce these uncertainties, well, it's not enough to observe things. This is what has been started in the beginning of radiation protection. There was observation, of course, of effects, of pathological effects, of cancer development. of course, the mother of all cohorts of the Hiroshima-Nagasaki was a key element in that, but this was mainly based on observation at the beginning. Of course, the graal of research is to understand why we have this observation, to understand the mechanisms. And therefore, the low-dose issues, we still don't understand enough of the mechanisms. We understand the mechanism of effect of aggression of the DNA and the DNA repairing system, which maybe is more or less efficient. So this is quite well known. But what influences the efficiency of the repair system is poorly understood. The role of the immune system, what is genetic, what is epigenetic, what is just related to the stress of a person in relation to other sources of stress, not only radiological, of course. These are elements which are not understood, therefore not modeled, therefore not included in a system of radiation protections in an explicit manner. So there's a lot of work to be done there. Another area is Jean-Christophe mentioned, is the individual radiation sensitivity, which is a very complex issue, and Melody and other platforms will organize in the spring a seminar to actually develop a research roadmap for studying this subject of radiation sensitivity. And we have another area, a third area, which is the influence of the dose rate. This is taken care of in the ICRP system, but maybe in a simplistic way, with just coefficients. And when you have so much difference between the environmental or radon exposure dose rate, which is very low, and the medical dose rate, which is usually quite high, even if it's an imaging system, one wonders that the phenomena cannot be the same. And we have to understand that, of course, appreciating that low-dose rate research, there is very little research in the past, and it's very expensive. It's a good reason, because it's maybe not so much to observe, so it's more difficult, and also it's more costly to operate. But this is a problem that has to be cracked. Of course, it's not enough to just continue to have the fundamental research. We also need to improve what I call the decision support toolbox. And there we have still areas of development. I would just mention two in the medical areas, which is where the large part of the collective dose comes from in our modern societies, and it's increasing all the time. Well, there's still a lot of work to do on the reference levels, for example, so it's quite practical, but if you don't have that, and many countries don't have a good system of reference levels. Even in Europe, it's not harmonized, and we have to go to improve that. So this is very practical. It requires experts to exchange and to maybe experiment and to benchmark with practice in hospitals. It's a lot of work, but it's extremely useful for the community. Another area in the medical is radiotherapy, where the protocols could be improved if we had more detailed knowledge of the dosimetry to sub-organs, for example. So you take breast radiotherapy. This is one of the goals of the European Medirad project, is to actually better understand the effect on the cardiovascular system of breast radiotherapy. But for that, you need to have a dosimetric model, not only of the heart as a whole, this we have, but of the sub-compartments of the heart. And this, we have no organized dosimetric system, which is recognized, which is accepted by the scientific and the medical community. So there's things to be done. And on a completely different subject, Jean-Christophe mentioned this already, but I come back to that because I think it's also a very important aspect, is the post-accident management. To manage the permanent evacuation or long-term evacuation of populations, I will come back to that in my conference tomorrow. The decision support tools cannot deal only with radiation, because radiation is only one of the consequences of the evacuation or of the accident. And at the moment, the decision support tools do not model properly the functioning of a society as a whole. It only models the dose, which is one of the ingredients, but not the only ingredient of a good public decision. So that's what leads me to say something about the values, because particularly it's clear in this issue of post-accident situations, the radiation protection system, when it addresses exposure of the population, does not consider citizens as actors of their own radiation protection. They are submitted to a dose, and the regulators or whoever, experts, make recommendations. But this system does not take into account that people can actually be actors. They can have measuring instruments, and they can act on their own dosimetry. This is not reflected in the public policies in general. And this is a value problem. The other aspect is about the radiation risk and other risks. If you consider the management of radiological risks on its own, then there is a possibility that to resolve that, to reduce the burden of the radiological risk, you shift the risks elsewhere. But that's not correct as a society, because the health risks from evacuating territories unduly by pure protection creates other health risks. So how do you deal with that? And of course, the regulatory authorities, well, I'm looking at the radiation risk, that's my job. But shifting the risks elsewhere is not a good answer. It's extremely complex, and again, science needs to further understand that. So it's an extension of the remark that Jean-Christophe made about multi-exposure. That's one aspect. The other aspect is shifting of risk from one area to another due to governmental decisions, regulatory decisions. So we need to increase our understanding of that, and this calls for a major input of the social sciences and humanities, of course. So we can improve in Europe. We are doing that, and I think Europe has been pioneering the research program, and we are busy preparing a joint roadmap between all the platforms that will map the research and its costs for the priority objectives over the next decades. But we are not alone in Europe, and of course the ICRP is an international organization, and I would just like to mention that we are aware that in the US, in Japan, and other places, there is thinking also about what to do with research. And, well, there are initiatives in the US and in Japan and with Europe. And altogether, I think we can, maybe not as developed as these European integrations, but I think we still have quite a bit of margin of progress to organize better international research in order to better serve the goals, which are those which Claire mentioned about permanently reviewing in a science-based manner the concepts of radiation protection. And this is international perspective. So I hope that this will continue in the future, because we need, of course, research to reduce uncertainties, to improve the toolbox, but we also need to share the results so that they are implemented. So there's the role of UNSCARE, which hasn't been mentioned, but it's also a very important institution. The regulatory system, and ICRP is sitting in the middle of that with its international partnership. So I think this symposium, again, is a first of a kind. It has been unique, and we will be keen to evaluate the input from you, because this is a working seminar. You will hear conferences, but I think there's many occasions, including in the corridors, to talk with your counterparts and to get involved, maybe in a slightly different way, for the researchers to become aware that there's your laboratory, but there's also the outside world, and for the stakeholders, for the regulatory experts, the ICRP experts, to be aware also of the difficulty of science and the need to focus scientific developments on the key priorities and not to disperse efforts, because resources are scarce. We heard Claire talk about please give money to ICRP, but research has funds, but they're also limited, so choices have to be made, and these choices should be made together. Thank you very much, and enjoy the symposium and the European conference.